Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone gathered here. I'm Swati, Program Director of Aspen. I'm here on behalf of Kiran Pasricha, our Executive Director and CEO. She's indisposed today. She couldn't be here. She sends her apologies. Aspen and ICRIER have come together today for the launch of the report BIT and Beyond, Advancing India-US Economic Relations. The session will be chaired by Ambassador Ronan Sen. Ambassador Ronan Sen has been our ambassador to Mexico, Russia, Germany, and USA. He is the only Indian so far to serve as the ambassador to 4 G8 countries, including 3 P5 capitals. He's had a number of assignments as special or personal envoy of the Prime Minister for meetings with the heads of state. Ambassador Sen will be taking over. Over to you, Ambassador Sen. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, and I congratulate Aspen India and ICRIER for taking this initiative, very timely initiative, I must say, just immediately after the inauguration of President Obama, second inauguration, to have this gathering and the discussion on India-US relations, and that too focused on the economic aspect of the relationship, which requires particular attention, and it's a vital component, a vital foundation of any long-term relationship, let alone India's most important relationship and most diversified relationship. And Ambassador Hemant Kishan Singh has prepared a report which, without any further ado, I'd like to request him to present. But just before that, I would like to say that that it's good to see Ambassador Nancy Powell with us. She's landed running when she arrived here in April. Immediately after that, I mean, a lot of activities. But this event is very, very special because today we have the honor to have in our midst our Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Salman Khurshid, who really needs no introduction. But his presence itself is the best manifestation you can have of the priority which India attaches to this relationship. So without any further ado, Hemant, I request you to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Minister Salman Khurshid, Ambassador Nancy Powell, our Chair for this evening, Ambassador Ronan Sen, and my colleague from ICRIER, Rajat Kathuria. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, let me begin by just a quick word of thanks to Aspen India and to Kiran, who we are missing today because she's indisposed, for partnering us this evening for the launch of this BIT and Beyond report. I'd like to also thank my colleagues at ICRIER. Rajat is here, but very particularly I'd like to thank Tinsy Sarah Solomon. Tinsy, please stand up. She's my contributing author, and she's done a lot of spade work and research. Quite obviously, this is a long report, so I do not pretend that I will go through every aspect of it. I'll try to trace for you the basic DNA of the report in 6 segments. The first is the backdrop. The second is the current trends. Third are the constraints, then mentioning some remedies, and putting forward a roadmap for a BIT and Beyond approach. And finally, some conclusions, especially those which I hope the Minister will heed. To begin with the backdrop, basically, India is now poised to possibly emerge as an economic powerhouse by 2030. so says the US National Investment Council's latest report on Global Trends 2030. This is obviously not preordained. It depends on addressing many challenges which we face. But an immediate one which we face is emerging from the current macroeconomic imbalances, the low growth and the lagging investment cycle into which we are currently placed. This is a strategic imperative, I would add. It's also linked to our future security. So this is the first of the backdrops. The second is the last 6 months have seen an amazing number of reaffirmations by the United States about the importance of India's emergence as a global power for the US. These have included Secretary Clinton saying that US has placed a strategic bet on India. NSA Donnellan has said that the US extends a full embrace of India's rise. And Secretary Panetta has called India the linchpin of the US pivot. So these two really must drive us into thinking new ways how to advance our economic relations. The third of the backdrops, which is unusual, you might question why I'm using it, but anyway, we'll come to that later, is that trade liberalization is increasingly taking place outside the WTO through regional trade agreements. An estimated 80% of all rules that regulate the functioning of world markets are today accounted for by the preferential trade agreements entered into by the US and the European Union. India really needs now to raise its involvement and ambition on FTAs. With that, turn to the trends. Trends are good. India-US relations. Cumulatively, the US is India's largest economic partner for trade, investment, jobs, and technology. So that in democracies is extremely important. Our trade has already exceeded 100 billion if you take both services and goods. The trade grew an amazing 30.59% in 2011-12, which is virtually the same as the growth of trade between India and its recent FTA or CEPA partners, which is amazingly good, as I said. $500 billion of bilateral trade by 2020 is distinctly possible. Next, the US is a major investor in India, but in talking about the US as the 5th largest investor, we forget that over a 5-year cycle from 2007 to 2011, the US is the leading investor in terms of number of projects and number of jobs created, some 355,000 jobs in that period. Similarly, India's investments in the US are comparable, they're growing. If you take M&A acquisitions and greenfield investments together, they are really possibly more than $20 billion. The technology sector alone supports a total of around 280,000 jobs in the United States. So overall, to use an American statistic, in President Obama's first term, US investment in India up 30%, Indian investment in the US up 40%. The absence of a BIT is quite an anomaly. And it will certainly, if we are able to conclude a BIT, it will certainly help expand trade and investment, including in key areas like infrastructure. Now, the constraints. Let me mention 3 general constraints and 3 specific constraints. First is that as large and vigorous democracies, both tend to seek liberal market access abroad while practicing their respective forms of protectionism at home. Second, both currently face the urgency of undertaking economic reforms and domestic political gridlock. And third, and this is important, we do need to take into account that all this said, there are large disparities between the two. India is still struggling to develop and does not quite, has a long way to go before it can enjoy the kind of widespread prosperity which the US offers its citizens. Specific constraints, there are 3, 2 from India's side, 1 bilateral. From India's side, first is the setbacks to India's investment climate, stalled reforms, regulatory uncertainty, and draconian tax measures. That's the first. The second, Symbol and symptom of this adverse scenario is the FDI in multi-brand retail with opt-outs for states. Again, that is a recipe for continuing uncertainty. On the bilateral side, I think there's just one which I need to mention. India does not figure at all in the USTR's trade agenda. The trade policy forum between the two countries has not even met since 2010. Some remedies I'd like to mention. First, from the Indian side, India has already embraced globalization for the benefits it brings and now needs to align its domestic policies with the open global economic order it propagates abroad. Second, after a couple of decades of what I term politically constrained liberalization, it is time for India to give a definitive direction to its economic policy. And I mention here just one particular area. There's a major need to liberalize FDI in a host of sectors. I will mention only one sector, which is the defense sector. FDI in defense can have a much greater impact on India's technological prowess, high-end manufacturing, and strategic autonomy than FDI in retail. We should be considering it. Some would say, what happens to the national aspect and the domestic economy, etc. In areas where we have allowed 100% FDI, like IT, oil and gas, and automotive, it's clear that Indian companies are world leaders. So, I mean, there is something to think about from that experience. Outlook for any of these remedies being applied, I think the government now fully recognizes that there is an urgent need for reform. But I think with elections coming up next year, it remains to be seen how many of these reforms will be undertaken in 2013. Let me now move on to the roadmap for BIT and beyond. First is that certainly the BIPA-BIT negotiations on which we've just had preliminary contacts so far should be fast-tracked during this year. The US BIT model has been renewed. Its objectives are quite clear: market openness, protection of investments, and enforcement of rights. India, on the other hand, is undertaking a review because of recent investor-state arbitration cases, concerns like treaty shopping, and broad provisions like fair and equitable treatment. So I have three recommendations to the Indian side or to our government as they consider what they need to do about future BIPAs. First is that the investor-state arbitration function is essential to BITs, and taking it away will severely undermine India's investment climate. Second is that what is more important is to establish the predictability of India's regulatory and taxation regime, and to remember that all host state regulatory functions fall under the ambit of BITs unless specifically excluded. Third, that as DEA and Department of Economic Affairs and DIPP coordinate our eventual review of BIPAs, we should be able to craft an investment-friendly regime, investor protection, and regulatory space for the needs of a developing economy in a harmonious balance. That's the challenge for our own side. Now, there are Indian concerns about the US BIT model, and we've examined all of them in the report. On pre-establishment rules, of course, accepting a blanket provision is not likely at all. But India's recent CEPAs do contain more restrictive provisions for national treatment, and I think that's the way things will go. Second area of concern is intellectual property rights. One area which will come up when we negotiate a BIT would be preserving room for low-cost, life-saving generics in India. I think that the solution will have to be found within the TRIPS compliance which India promises and strengthened IPR enforcement in India. Labor and environment clauses in the US BIT model are not under ISDS or ISA enforcement, so I do not foresee a problem in that area. Prohibitions against performance requirements, again, middle ground is possible on the basis of India's CEPAs with Japan and other countries. Conclusion on this is that the BIT is doable, but will certainly require flexibility, pragmatic adjustments, and a customized BIT model is likely to emerge. Beyond the BIT, as India moves forward with this element of our economic architecture building and our own economic liberalization progresses, we recommend that both sides should prepare the ground for a future FTA. Completion of the India-EU BTIA should provide an incentive for the US. The expected launch of a US-EU FTA should provide an incentive for India. Business sectors of both India and the United States are generally likely to be positive towards an India-US FTA. As part of India's preparation on this side, I have a few recommendations. First, we must examine what kind of FTAs we have signed, because they are lagging behind in quality and they are lagging behind in utilization. The India-ASEAN FTA provides only 73.8% tariff liberalization, which is the lowest of all ASEAN +1 FTAs. Only 17.9% of India's trade is with FTA partners, as against 38.8% for the US and 73.8% for Europe. In order to enhance India's role in shaping the rules of globalization, the government should study the costs and benefits of advanced FTAs. It should also consider how developed countries deal with advanced FTAs through trade adjustment programs and safety nets, and implement these before we undertake any such FTAs. Domestic reform, it is the contention of the authors that domestic reforms plus greater harmonization with global markets will yield major welfare gains for India's economy. Of course, there is a caveat there that on both sides, we need to generate public support for trade liberalization. Final 3 points before I come to conclusions. On Asian economic architecture, it's clear that the 10+6 RCEP is looking increasingly attractive. Studies done on the welfare gains show that India's economy could gain as much as 3.4% of GDP from a 10+6 RCEP. However, India may have joined these negotiations, but will face major difficulties because of China's domination within RCEP. Comparatively, the TPP, which the US has launched with 11 countries, will yield lower welfare gains for the US itself, just 0.1% of GDP. The recommendation here is that there is a patchwork emerging of FTAs in Asia. And as it emerges, India and the US should intensify dialogue on regional economic architecture. India certainly requires to remain open to the TPP. And if I may say, the US needs to remain open to an FTA with ASEAN. Other issues, there are two. One is what you would probably expect me to at least mention, which is the visa issues and the IT sector issues, and the other is related to our bilateral engagement. First is reviving the Trade Policy Forum and restoring cooperation at the WTO. This is a difficult challenge. And all I can say is that our Commerce and Industry Minister has repeatedly come out in favor of liberalization. I think all these messages need to reach Geneva, and we await a new USTR, and hopefully we can put the TPF back on track. As far as the finding accommodation on the IT services sector is concerned, this is a two-way street. Let's make no mistake about it. Technology and innovation-driven Indian IT services for the US market are the highest end of India-US collaboration on the economic side. And 62% of our market is just the United States. And not just the market, but the kind of tie-ups which our companies have with American companies for vending these services worldwide, those are unmatched with any other relationship which we may have. So yes, this is an extremely positive part of our relationship. Outsourcing as a phenomenon is both a revalidation of globalization and a challenge. A reverse cycle is already underway. You see that from GE's decisions to move work back to the United States. Also on cost differential, by 2015, the cost differential will be just about 20% between hiring people in the United States and hiring people in India. So while the US needs to certainly move and address concerns on visa issues and totalization, India also needs to move towards more commercial presence-based or Mode 3, WTO Mode 3-based business models if it wishes to become a true services superpower. Now, my 4 conclusions from our research. First, of course, I must say that because of domestic political constraints in both countries, we cannot predict a time frame for progressing this roadmap. A new team in the Obama administration is obviously awaited, and we'll have to see. But while the continuity is provided by President Obama's return to the White House, we need to be a little bit realistic. And the first part of the realism is that the BIT must be and has to be the first step. First major step towards building an architecture of bilateral economic agreements. FTA is much more in the distant future, but steps can be taken on both sides to start working towards that in the long term. The third conclusion is that this year, economic relations must be given the highest priority in the bilateral agenda through close, high-level political direction. And the final recommendation is that this year's India-US strategic dialogue, which Minister Khurshid will host around about the middle of the year, can consider concretizing a long-term BIT and beyond roadmap, preferably through a separate joint statement. I leave that thought with you, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. Hemant. And I would now just request Dr. Kathuria, Director and CEO of ICRIER, to say a few words.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sure all of you are waiting to read what is in that report and the basis for the Ambassador's kind of cautious optimism of the engagement between India and the United States. And the report will be launched in a few minutes from now. I'm not going to stand between you and the Minister for very long, but I thought I'll just kind of talk a little bit about what ICRIER does. Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Excellency Nancy Powell, Ambassador of the United States to India, Ambassador Ronen Sen, Ambassador H.K. Singh. It is indeed with great pride and immense pleasure that I welcome all of you to the launch of ICRIER's report, BIT and Beyond, Advancing India-US Economic Relations, under the aegis of the ICRIER-Wadhwani Chair, on India-US policy studies. As you probably have already guessed, the chair is held by Ambassador H.K. Singh, under which this report has been prepared, and ably supported by a young and dynamic team. And Tinsy was mentioned, singled out by the ambassador earlier on. As ICRIER celebrates more than 30 years at the forefront of policy making, we fondly recall the vision of our founder, Dr. K.B. Lal, who many of you would probably have heard of, know, who as far back as in 1981, within the environs of where we are sitting today, at the India International Center, ICRIER's first home was at the India International Center, decided that it was time to establish a think tank that would provide analytical and robust basis for economic policy making, thereby facilitating India's integration with the global economy and continued engagement with the global economy. That was in 1981. It was those of you who've studied the Indian economy, it was 10 years later that India actually, the wheels of liberalization began to move in 1991. But ICRIER's contribution in the interim, I think, we would all like to think, and I think there is some truth in that, that there was contribution in the interim made by ICRIER that shaped the discourse of policymaking, and I don't think that should or can be underestimated. Even as the scope of ICRIER's activities have, as you would imagine, significantly enlarged since 1981, to include domestic issues that Ambassador Singh has also touched upon that have become extremely important to us as far as our domestic economy is concerned. And those issues include stabilization of the national economy, urbanization, inclusive growth, and increasingly now climate change. All these today form a core theme of our research agenda. We continue to augment the body of knowledge linked to globalization and strategic aspects of India's economic relations. That was ICRIER's baptism and continues to be important to us, although, as you would imagine, as India's economy liberalizes, a lot more domestic issues become important, and we've embraced them. And we've put out a body of knowledge. Those of you who visit our website, you would see there is a body of knowledge that looks at issues that are important at the domestic level for India. The report on FDI and retail that Ambassador mentioned, impact of internet, impact of mobile telephony, ongoing project on normalization of trade trends, trade relations with Pakistan, to name a few, are examples of ICRIER's research at the forefront of the trends linked to globalization. And there are, research, just not to spend too much time, but just to mention, there are various aspects of international finance and regulatory issues that inform India's position in the G20. We are the Secretariat, or not the Secretariat, but we provide help to the Secretariat in the Ministry of External Affairs. There's research on Indo-Japanese strategic relations, the impact of Indo-Korea FTA that also the ambassador referred to, and study on the feasibility of a Taiwan-India FTA are currently being done at ICRIER. And ICRIER is also the Secretariat for what is known as the PSAG, the Private Sector Advisory Group. The US-India Private Sector Advisory Group was set up, for those of you probably know, sitting in the audience, was set up in 2007 as an adjunct to the ministerial level India-US Trade Policy Forum of the Government of India and the Government of the United States. The PSEG co-chairs in India are Dr. Ishwar Ahluwalia, our chairperson, and on the United States side, a very well-known economist, Dr. Fred Bergston, who's currently the director of the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington. The objective of the PSAG is to provide strategic recommendation and policy insights, and there has been a report on sectoral technology trade agreement that was submitted to the Trade Policy Forum, which Ambassador referred to, which is in a state of dormancy at the moment. The BIT and Beyond report continues, as you would notice, continues the trend of ICRIER working on contemporary issues of relevance in a very challenging economic environment, and suggests a roadmap for India's enhancing its engagement in trade and investment with the United States, as Ambassador mentioned, through a BIT in the short term, and perhaps a little more optimistically with an FTA in the near future. And I hope we see the fructification of some of these initiatives. And finally, let me say that we at ICRIER appreciate the careful and industrious efforts of Ambassador Singh and his dynamic team in preparing this concise and very, when you read it, it's a very reader-friendly report. We thank the Wadhwani Foundation for generous support to the Honorable Minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, and Excellency Ambassador Powell for gracing this important event, which has been jointly organized by ICRIER and Aspen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kathoria, for your illuminating words and also for your contribution. and increasing contribution of ICRIER, and wish you all the best in your further endeavors. May I now request our dear friend, Ambassador Nancy Powell, to share her thoughts with us.
All these tall people. Namaste, assalamu alaikum, and good evening to all of you. It is a real honor for me to be here tonight alongside External Affairs Minister Khurshid, Ambassador Sen and Singh, and Dr. Katuria. Reports such as the one that brings us together tonight, as well as its CSIS counterpart from Washington, provide invaluable recommendations, analysis, and perspectives on the decisions governments make that can help or hurt economic relations. I'd like to congratulate CSIS and ICRIER on these very, very thorough analyses. All of us in the room tonight have a chance to help shape the future of the U.S.-India relationship. The year 2013 offers a special window of opportunity. The U.S. has just concluded an election in which President Obama and his second administration team will be looking to fulfill the pledges that were made during the campaign and to complete initiatives that were begun during the first term. When he was here in 2010, President Obama said, U.S.-India ties are a defining partnership of the 21st century. We can all contribute to this important relationship and help to fulfill the commitments both countries have made to invest in our intertwined futures. Toward that end, I want to welcome Ambassador Singh and ICRIER's recommendations for both countries to exercise flexibility in investment negotiations, for continued efforts to further reform the Indian economy in addition to bilateral agreements, and the call to look beyond the bit to conduct a cost-benefit analysis on international trade agreements outside of the WTO. These are all extraordinarily well-timed. Under the U.S.-India Strategic Dialogue, both countries have regular channels to engage on these and many other key drivers of economic growth. And we need to further strengthen and reinvigorate our efforts through frank discussions of new ideas that lead us to action plans and ultimately to concrete delivery. Whether it is through partnering in manufacturing to create jobs in both our countries, collaborating more closely on strengthening infrastructure in India, extending regional economic connectivity to third countries, setting an example globally on energy cooperation, or teaming up to advance innovation through increased protections on intellectual property and greater investments in research, there is much that India and the United States can do together. At the close of 2012, former Assistant Secretary Rick Inderfurth celebrated the release of the U.S. counterpart to tonight's report. Taken together, these reports provide invaluable analysis and recommendations about the path our two governments can consider to further strengthen this already vibrant relationship. Reports like these are excellent starting points for thoughtful discussions about practical steps both governments and private sectors can take to bring this relationship to the next level. The United States applauds the recent decisions by the government of India to offer greater predictability in India's tax regime and to invite foreign investors into new segments of the Indian economy. Opening new avenues for companies from both of our countries to exchange ideas, best practices, and grow businesses together will benefit all of us in the long run. There are many examples of how this is already happening. I was in Guwahati last month, where I inaugurated a new American Business Corner, aimed at assisting India's small and medium-sized companies to connect with U.S. companies. In Hyderabad, I have seen how U.S. and Indian companies employ thousands of engineers in research and development centers that feed new products and processes that span our globe. In Chennai, workers from rural households work for U.S. companies such as Caterpillar that make mining and construction equipment to build global infrastructure. Our state-to-state and local partnerships are an example of this effort. I'm proud to say our peoples, our cities, and our states are connecting like never before. For instance, next Monday, the mayor of San Antonio, Texas, will bring a delegation of 23 companies and state-level government officials to Delhi, then on to Hyderabad and Chennai. Healthcare, information technology, automotive manufacturers, higher education, among other sectors, will be represented in this delegation. In early February, Governor Jack Markell will bring 15 businesses and government officials to meet with their counterparts in Mumbai, Bangalore, and Delhi to strengthen business ties and promote investment opportunities in Delaware. Previous visits to India include Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley's historic trip to India that created $60 million in two-way business in infrastructure, technology, education, and security. Kentucky Governor Steve Beshear, whose 3 trips to India in an effort to promote engagement with states and cities throughout the country, yielded Kentucky a $7 billion, 25-year private sector energy deal. And Virginia continues to sustain nearly $300 million in annual exports of goods to India. It has developed many sustainable ties. In 2010, Norfolk, Virginia, became the first city on the U.S. East Coast to have a sister city alliance with India through partnership with the city of Kochi in Kerala. Regional engagement also strengthens small and medium-sized enterprises in both countries by syncing sectors and regions. In India, these SMEs contribute nearly 45% of manufacturing output and 40% of national exports. The United States SME sector has more than doubled its exports to India in the past decade. Ambassador Singh, I want to say again how much I applaud the thorough analysis your report provides of U.S.-India trade and investment, and the detailed outline of India's present foreign investment policy. I hope that this report, along with its CSIS counterpart and others, will serve to open a productive discussion on our paths forward. I urge our governments and private sectors to take the visionary ideas generated in these reports and to turn them quickly into practical, concrete action. It will be on this solid foundation that we can unleash the true potential in our bilateral economic relationship. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for your suggestions and for your and the comments that you made, which are very encouraging. Now I have the pleasure to request our chief guest, External Affairs Minister, the Honorable External Affairs Minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, to share his thoughts with us, his vision with us. And this is a very important occasion because this is his first the first time he'll be doing so and speaking on India-US relations. So, and we look forward with great anticipation to listening to you, sir.
Good evening to you all. Thank you, Ambassador Ronan Sen, for raising the bar, and that puts a heavy burden on me. Excellency, Ambassador Nancy Powell, Ambassador H.K. Singh, and the driving force of this report, Dr. Rajat Kathuria, very distinguished ladies and gentlemen, faces that one associates with the long story of relations between the U.S. and India, and their contribution that many of you have made to this remarkable tale. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today, and of course conscious of the fact that this comes soon after the inaugural of President Obama for the second term, to which, as the ambassador said, many of the visionary steps that were spoken of promised during the campaign we will see come to fruition in the next 4 years. And I'm told the second term of the American president can be the best term in a sense. Unfortunately, as that is an institution that we haven't yet figured out in our country, because every term of ours is a very bad term, because at the end there is still desire for another term. Anyhow, be that as it may, I must tell you that this talk of economic partnership that is of the most highest significance to both of us today comes in the context of our reflection of what has happened in the 2 decades that I've been away from the Ministry of External Affairs. As I come back here after the 1990s, early 1990s, obviously we see explicitly a remarkable transformation and a change that has taken place in the India-US relationship during this period. We were still at the fag end in 1990s of the concept or the perception of estranged democracies. And we are here now as strategic partners, as very important trade partners, and working together in many fields of human endeavor that are extremely significant. But I want to say something, Ambassador, that perhaps has never been said to you before. Just as our economy was never entirely state-controlled, and it was a wonderful model that we call the mixed economy that has state control and free enterprise work hand in hand. Similarly, our relationship with the United States of America was never entirely a relationship of negativity. It was a mixed relationship. We worked together. The good and the not so good worked together all the time. And therefore, when the moments of transformation came, all we needed to do was to change the mix of the economy as far as our economic model was concerned, and change a little mix of our relationship as far as this wonderful relationship between the US and India is concerned. And what we have done essentially is taken the positive elements of our relationship, and those positive elements of our relationship have always been of great significance to us as 2 important democracies of the world, and we've highlighted those and added to them an economic content. So it makes, as it were, a very powerful model, because what we've added is economics to what essentially was what could be described as an extra economic relationship that always existed between the US and India. But the important thing, of course, is that no matter what George Bernard Shaw would say, we now speak a lot more American English, particularly amongst our young people, than the English. Be that as it may, but I hope that we have over the years also, as I gathered from the manner of your greeting of the audience, we have also added to your vocabulary many words and many phrases from Indian languages that enrich, as indeed has always been the case with American culture. So this important collaboration, convergence, and cooperation now has a very strong fundamental basis, and I think described exceptionally vividly by the President himself during his visit here in 2010. And I do want to share with you that I had the good fortune to accompany him across the country. And in Mumbai, as he stood watching the books and various things that belong to Mahatma Gandhi on display, for a moment I felt that he had transported himself to another plane. And then he looked at me and said, "Do you know that if it hadn't been for this man, I would perhaps not be where I am today?" And I thought that was essentially for me the defining moment about the new or the then and now again the second-term President of the United States of America. Now somewhere there in that feeling is the essence of what we believe is a possible special communication link between us and the leadership of the United States of America, but we do realize that to keep and sustain it and to give it strength and give it viability, we need to work on our economic relationship. And therefore, I do believe that this report comes at a very, very timely moment, a moment when, as this study summarizes, we've had a fourfold increase in bilateral trade and more in investment, and the natural discourse, therefore, is a positive one. The clear, rapid, sustained employment-generating economic growth and development being vital for India, and therefore addressing these critical challenges in this report comes, as I believe, in a very beneficial and valuable way. The challenges, of course, as have been mentioned, are about the physical and policy environment that is required both within the country in domestic terms for rapid economic growth and to enhance the capacity of India as a state to be able to reach out to the United States of America, provide to the United States of America the platforms, compatible platforms, by which what we clearly aspire together and mutually is something that can be achievable. And that will be possible, obviously, if we have enhanced trade and investment flows in both directions, helping provide much greater business opportunities, and also to ensure that our reliance on each other and our compatibility and dependence on each other in the wholesome way continues to grow. The flow of capital, services, goods, and equally important for India, technology and capabilities has the potential to transform this relationship. And of course, this does not come as a one-way relationship. It must inevitably be a two-way relationship. And we've spoken of domestic environment. And I do want to explain to you, and I think it's important that our American counterparts understand the issue about domestic environment in India. We do things in India somewhat differently. Much of what we have done in terms of economic reform has been done in either an unstated manner or done in a manner that has not alarmed people who've grown up and been accustomed to a different economic model in the past. I recall in the years that I have been in government, 5 years that I was in government earlier and subsequently, we've never as a cabinet, never as a council of ministers gathered together to actually talk about what is economic reform about, except for the very first meeting that we were called to under Prime Minister when I first got to the cabinet, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, who in a sense laid bare a blueprint that had been prepared by late Mr. Rajiv Gandhi in the expectation that he would lead the country into a new era of economic reform. I had the good fortune to work then as Deputy Minister of Commerce, and the Minister of Commerce at that time was Mr. Chidambaram, none other than Mr. Chidambaram, and the Secretary of Commerce at that time was none other than Montek Singh Ahluwalia. So you couldn't have had a better ringside view of how the great minds were thinking about reform in this country. But we spoke very little about reform. We spoke about the consequences and results, good ones, of reform, but we never spoke about reform in any great detail. We never actually spoke on the philosophy of reform. We never actually spoke about reform as a very specific electoral commitment. And of course, when we needed to speak about reform, we spoke about reform with the human face, or the middle path, the Buddhist middle path. And that served us well. It served us well because it prevented the political shock. It avoided the political shock that would have come to several generations who had grown up on anything but reform as part of their intellectual diet about the marketplace. But we know that it was important. There were compulsions, and there were aspirations, and there were opportunities that could not have been accessed but for the reform that took place. So major swift changes took place in many significant areas of human endeavor without a stated commitment to reform. Reform, therefore, came, as it were, quietly, silently. There was truly a silent revolution. The only time it became noisy, Ambassador, was when we publicly stood up and the present Prime Minister staked his government on a very specific issue of relationship with the United States of America, and that was the civil nuclear agreement. And then we became voluble. We'd been a little voluble on the WTO, but we became voluble for the first time, staked our government, and then actually went into an election with the civil nuclear agreement to the United States of America as a pivotal and important and significant achievement, which tied up our concept of new relationships in a new world and an emerging global economic order where the standard points of reference in India's economic management had disappeared for no fault of ours, because the world had changed. Our trade relations had changed because the world had changed. Our perception of friends and not so friendly people had changed because the world had changed. The Cold War was over. And the very purpose for which we built the platform of the NAM movement, that purpose had been served. We could now remain neutral without necessarily having to choose between poles. And therefore, neutrality became a buzzword for everybody. Everybody was neutral. There was no longer any Cold War. And this transformation came at a time when we were transforming our society. So was it the cause or the effect is something that we leave ICRIER to consider in another report. I imagine that you haven't really gone into those philosophic notions this time around. I don't want to ruin the charm of reading this report on your own and coming to your own conclusions, but some of the findings there is highlighted also by Ambassador H.K. Singh, who incidentally, I must share this with you, amongst other Foreign Service officers, was Ambassador H.K. Singh, was also my tutor and teacher at St. Stephen's College. So while I can say that my teacher has done well, my teacher can say that his student has done well. So just coming back to the key conclusions, it's obvious, and we all know that we are two countries with great similarities, enormous similarities, but also in economic terms, we still have great dissimilarities. We are not a developed country, and the United States is in the post-development stage, if I'm not mistaken. They've been a developed country for a very long, like postmodernism, they're now into post-development, and we are still struggling with development. So we want to keep you sustained as a developed country, and we want you to hold hands with us and pull us through into the level of a developed country, and that's how I think we need to work together. The political challenges that we both face in matters of promoting free trade and investment flows. Internal political challenges, etc., are familiar to you. Third, the world is obviously looking at different ways. You could say that the world is getting divided into separate free trade blocks, the membership of which is cross-cutting, and we need to ask ourselves if that is sustainable. And the world is also in parallel, not as speedily, but in parallel working on the larger global picture, the WTO. Is it that the free trade regions will replace WTO entirely if WTO doesn't move, or is it that they will finally become building blocks of WTO? The fundamental principles, obviously, as India negotiates these arrangements in our own region, as indeed beyond our region, the ASEAN, European Union, and the United States of America, the fundamental principles that we have espoused and we've held up, held up for the world are fundamental principles that largely, with some modification, obviously, will continue to apply to our negotiations. Fourthly, there's need for a positive approach on both sides, and that can be underscored many times over. And as the report suggests, I find it says, I quote, both sides have to go beyond the litany of complaints that hold each other responsible. And that's, of course, I think, very important. Is the glass half full? Is the glass half empty? Something that can simply state what we need to do. And I think we've done that. We've looked at the brighter side and tried to get away from the darker issues, and that's how it's worked well. And of course, fifthly, it needs to be recognized that India has actually been quite proactive in negotiating BITs and CEPAs. India has more BITs in place than the United States of America. And I just want to not really add a word of caution, but bring you on board about one very important issue. And the important issue is that we've been talking about bilateral and investment trade treaties in a somewhat segregated manner. We still, in our country, thinking in silos, and when I say that we are thinking in silos, we still suffer from the unstated philosophy or philosophical principle of reform. Reform equal to free market, equal to disinvestment, equal to privatization, because many of these words are still to reach a comfort level with the large sections of our society. Not because they have an inherent ideological opposition to them, but simply because we haven't tried hard enough to explain to our people and to be willing to take the risk of putting some of these ideas as ideas on which an election can be won or lost. We don't want to lose an election because people don't understand reform. We want to win an election and continue to offer reform to them. That's the way we work. And therefore, you would find that sometimes people in government in this country take up a position that they then promptly oppose when they get into opposition. And that's not because we are hypocritical. That's only because we are not strong enough in political ideology. And I think we have to strengthen our political ideology and be willing and be prepared to fight, win, and lose elections on stated economic principles. But we'll get there. That's a process. That's a process of maturity in the electoral political atmosphere, and I'm sure that we will get there in due course. And I should add that for the present, I doubt that there will be a great appetite amongst developing countries for what the report describes as high standard standards of WTO plus agreements. And that's, I think, there for everyone to see. This is something that, even where something not related to the BIT, the report, for instance, correctly notes frustration amongst Indian IT and IT-enabled services firms in the high visa rejection rates. We also see a need, as has been mentioned, to start a serious discussion on the totalization agreement. We need to address the resentment of professionals who contribute to the social security system, which they can never use. It's hard to justify this in the matter of US when we've concluded similar agreements with G8 economies. But I believe that this is work in progress. It's not something that, again, as I said, is a negative dimension that should hold us back. I do agree that the central thesis of this report, it's correct that the India-US bilateral investment treaty is undoubtedly desirable. The report also suggests that this can be done in the near term. This is certainly an ambitious suggestion, I believe. I think we have to work very hard to see if we can achieve it, if not in near terms, in not so near terms. On the other hand, while the goal may be common, both sides need to agree on how we get there, and I think that's the important work that we have to do over the next few months. In other words, we need to agree on the model of BIT that we can accept, as Ambassador H.K. Singh has very eloquently said to us already. The point that I thought that I will share with you is lack of clarity on what is the reason and purpose and objective of such investment and trade treaties is essentially what has caused some of our top institutions to investment that took place in this country, and then caused a question mark on our investment climate. Those of you who follow the Supreme Court would know that when we sought an advisory opinion from the Supreme Court, we placed about 9 questions before them, 5 of which we thought were very, very important questions. And the Supreme Court said in its judgment that it will answer 5. But the Supreme Court actually ended up answering only 4. The 5th question was a very significant question. And that 5th question was, in deciding what relief to give, should the courts of the land factor in implications on the international economic relationship of the country, i.e., should they factor in such treaties and agreements that reflect upon economic arrangements and economic relationships. And I say this because whenever common law courts decide an issue, they decide not only between 2 parties in front of it, but also decide in terms of implications for third-party rights. Courts always do that. Courts always look at what is practically the best way to solve a solution. For instance, master-servant cases, those who are familiar with contract law will know that in master-servant cases, injunctions are not granted. Even specific relief, as it's called, is not granted. But the court limits relief to damages, because the courts believe that you cannot force somebody to work for somebody who doesn't want that person to work for them. But certainly relief can be given by simply saying that this is equal to so much by way of damages, and that would compensate the loss that you have suffered. Now, that's the kind of thing that I believe the courts would inevitably do if the courts were fully on board and were familiar, and our system allowed the courts to become familiar with this vast new array of arrangements that we are making across the globe, which have a lot to do with understanding of fundamental economic issues and how the global economic systems work. And I hope that that will happen one day, very soon, when the Supreme Court is made aware of the far-reaching consequences and implications of judgments where this is not taken into account, as we found that it is yet to be answered in that presidential reference that we placed before the Supreme Court. So when we begin to review our past agreements, we review our past agreements partly because the realization that it leads to consequences that could be crippling, but also because we are still uncertain that the courts would take into account such agreements. In many countries, such agreements do not require parliamentary legislation. They can be ratified through a procedure that does not involve parliamentary legislation. But in India, parliamentary legislation becomes necessary. So without parliamentary legislation, the courts may not automatically be able to look at them. Although our experience is that in the area of climate change, in the area of environment, in the area of human rights, and vast commitments that we have made to the world about rights governance, including on freedom from corruption, the courts have taken on board international agreements without there being parliamentary legislation to support it. And therefore, I do hope that one day we will see a lot more and a better understanding of this as far as the judicial system is concerned, in which case we will be certainly more comfortable. I think we've had enough to reflect upon, and I would therefore, in closing, once again congratulate Ambassador H.K. Singh and Ms. Solomon for putting together this very thoughtful and a very, very useful, timely document. It is a valuable contribution to the discourse on bilateral partnership. The report provides significant data, as you've just been told, collected in one place. Its recommendations are addressed equally to both sides and are certainly worthy of study. And if I recommend the report to all of those you who are interested in bilateral relationship and those who are not here but are interested, I obviously am recommending it to myself as well. I thank you for your attention, and I hope that this will become an important landmark in the relationship that we value, cherish, and that we want to build on. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Minister. It was I'm supposed to now actually sum up, but really, now may I, before I do that, may I request you, Minister, to formally launch this report. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think. Thank you. Now, I'm supposed to, sort of giving a summing up of this, but what we've had today has been, it's really a fascinating, address by the Minister, and not only, it's given the full perspective, and you can see that, as I said, he didn't need any introduction, but you saw all the elements, his historical perspective, his appreciation from, India as civilization, how we function, his holding the portfolio of corporate affairs. Of course, law and justice came out also very clearly. And the many aspects, sometimes quite unique, And because I was reminded of early stages of when he pointed out about our relationship, when the Constitution of India was being framed, or even before that, some fascinating discussions with Justice Hughes, and more important, with Justice Felix Frankfurter. Many of those issues are still not resolved, and in the balance which we have between the Supreme Court, the Parliament, and the Executive, and we are, evolving there, and also as as a government, and we are evolving not just as a democracy, but as a federal polity. So, and as democracies, I think here there should be better understanding between India and the United States, and not an automatic, ticking of boxes. So it's been fascinating, and also I'm glad that he has brought out, a number of people who were not aware of the fact that, the so-called reform process was, a lot of the thinking which went into it was actually started off by Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So, and that's been brought out in his address. It's fascinating. And this report has been noted and will be taken seriously by the minister, that's the government of India, and also as Ambassador had indicated, is going to be both the reports of the ICRIER report and this report by Rick Inderfirth also will be considered by both governments, which is a very, very welcome and pragmatic step to take. And this is going to be particularly important because this year we haven't fixed the dates, but the minister hopefully will be co-chairing the 4th meeting of the strategic dialogue, which will involve a lot of inputs. And so these and other inputs will be taken into consideration, and hopefully we will get into some progress. We cannot determine what the outcome will be, not only with the United States working for the BIT and the FTA, but bringing to conclusion the ongoing discussions with the European Union, which should also is at a fairly advanced stage, but bring those into, we have to see these in an integrated manner. But thank you very much for being here, and I would like to once again offer our sincere thanks to the Minister for gracing this occasion with his presence and for sharing his thoughts with us. We all benefited from it immensely, and Ambassador, thank you for your presence and for your support of these activities and for what you have noted and all that you're doing to strengthen relations at all levels. That is not just between, in the Beltway as you call it, and in Delhi, but beyond the Beltway, going on into relations between different states and cities and so on and so forth. And that's remarkable, and that's what it's an aspect of our relationship. And Ambassador Hemant Singh, thank you for an excellent report. And ICRIER, of course, for hosting this event. Thank you.
One small announcement. Copies of the report are available at the registration desk outside, and I invite you to have some refreshments before you leave us for tonight. The refreshments are available this side. Thank you.